Hello, everyone. I think we're all here now, and I think we could begin the session. I think it's a very topical session. My name is Panos Polyzoidis. I'm a journalist in Athens, as you can see. Well, the title is, the subtitle I gave is Infodemic 19, an outbreak of fake news as an opportunity to tackle this disinformation plague. I think it's very topical because we live in an era of fake news, and we live in a short period of fake news since the beginning of the pandemic. And this is clearly, in my view, linked to organized disinformation, but we'll have an opportunity to discuss all that with Asimakopoulou, who is an MEP, and I think she's got her microphone off at the time being.
Hello.
Hi. And Marisa Jimenez Martin, who is the person who's dealing with EU policy on behalf of Facebook. Is that correct, Marisa?
One of many of them, but indeed, yes. Hi.
Asimakopoulou is a member of European Parliament for the European People's Party, and Bart Groothuis is an MEP from the Netherlands, who belongs to the Renew Europe parliamentary party. Now, I would like first to start with what I just said, that the COVID-19 pandemic became an opportunity for fake news to spread, to accelerate as a standard feature of our information landscape, our global information landscape, and to what extent that is linked to the threat of organized disinformation. And I would like to throw that question to Bart to begin with, because I think he's someone who's dealt a lot with organized disinformation, so he may see the link there more clearly than I can.
Oh, I'm not sure, Panos, but I'll do my best. Thank you very much for having me on the show. So I think it's very much linked. So we see forms of misinformation, right? That's regular. Everyone receives weird things on Facebook and things from your aunt or uncle, which you think, is that right? And you start questioning yourself. But disinformation is actually different. It's not about harmful content, it's about malicious online behavior. And that's, I think, what the EU should be focusing on.
But do they not share some of the same techniques? Whether the spread of misinformation is spontaneous or organized and nefarious, some of the techniques are common, aren't they?
Well, it is. Well, but it's more nuanced. For example, in Russia, like Putin, when he came to power, he actually paid billions to an oligarch to, let's say, pollute the environment, the information environment. There's many misinformation, whether you're an atheist, you're a Christian, you're pro-West, against the West. Everyone has its own cup of whatever he likes. And then the Kremlin looks at other countries, what happens there, what is the tension in other countries. They pick something up, and then cross-media, cross-sectoral, cross-platform, they pick it up. They report something in Sputnik or Russia Today, they put it on Facebook, on Twitter, and then very fast it will pollute the information environment. And that's what we call disinformation campaigns, and it's very near to foreign interference, and that is the goal of our game here in Europe.
So there is a link from spontaneous misinformation being transferred into the foreground by use of regularly conventional media. That's what you're saying in a way, isn't it?
Whenever that's geopolitical feasible, or when it will benefit a goal that you have as a state, then people will pick it up and transport it, yes.
Yeah. I would like to address Marisa at this point and try to discuss the psychology behind fake news. I mean, what are the psychological traits that fuel people's propensity, likelihood of falling for such kind of information? And if I may, I would like to share a screen with you right now, which would be a sorry, this is it. This is a poll organized by Gallup International, which shows, I don't know if we can see
I'm
it.
afraid I can't see it, Panos.
No, I'm afraid I cannot see it either.
Okay, anyway, no. Okay, maybe. Anyway, it's a Gallup poll showing how many people in various countries believe that a foreign power or other force is deliberately spreading coronavirus. Now, we have some interesting findings there. Bulgaria is topping the list. More than almost 60% of the population believe that a foreign power, yeah, here it is. Okay, there you go.
There it is.
Are those your cats, Panos?
Some of them are dead, yes, but they are my cats. Yeah, there you go. You see, Bulgaria, Ecuador, Palestine. Palestine is a very interesting case because there are as many yeses as no's. So it's quite polarized. And then it's Bart country, the Netherlands. So we've heard all sorts of myths in recent months, including the dangers of 5G antennas, that they spread coronavirus. Many people in Western societies believe those myths as real. And I was wondering whether Marisa could elaborate on what it is that makes people likely to believe some of those things that, some are plausible, but many are really nonsense.
Yes. Well, thanks for that. I mean, I wouldn't be able, I wouldn't be qualified or able to tell you why, the psychology of people, as you put it, to believe fake news. But what we do know is that misinformation and disinformation is a real problem, and that we can find it on the platforms, like we can find it elsewhere, right? So it's not only an online issue, it's also in the offline world, but it is an issue. And what our users tell us is that they don't want to see misinformation. They come to Facebook to exchange views, to have points of view, to have perspectives. But I think that it's important. Some issues are important to distinguish when we talk about fake news. We actually don't talk about fake news as such. So to what the MEP was saying before, Groothuis was saying before, there's a distinction between misinformation. So what is, where there's content that is false or misleading, and then disinformation, which is that where there's an element of manipulation attached to it. So you use tactics in order to manipulate, to interfere, to influence people. And in that particular case, you can see instances where there is foreign powers or foreign external actors that want to interfere or manipulate a public debate and use, very known tactics to do that. But also, we should not undermine or oversee the fact that manipulation also exists in domestic markets by domestic players as well. One of the key tactics that are used is it's what we call coordinated inauthentic behavior, and that's what our experts are looking at on the platform. And it all starts usually with a fake account. So basically, there's the fake accounts, they get together, and what they try to do is they manipulate the behavior of people by creating audiences. So sometimes it's not about the content itself. It's not even whether it's false information. It's about the intention of the people behind who want to create, maybe with a very, maybe it's not a content that is that is very sensationalist or misleading, or content that is bad in itself, but it is used to capture audiences and create those audiences that then will be manipulated in a public discourse.
Right. Okay.
That's complicated. So it's not only about the content itself that is misleading, and we can talk about what we do with those, of course, but it's also about the intention to mislead behind it.
Okay, and that brings us to the purely political function of this phenomenon. And I would like to ask Anna Michelle Asimakopoulou. I'll put to you, Anna Michelle, that the American historian Richard Hofstadter, I read that in The Economist. I'm not that educated, but anyway, Richard Hofstadter, the American economist, believed that political paranoia may be a persistent psychic phenomenon, more or less constantly affecting a modest minority of the population. But certain historical catastrophes or frustrations may be conducing to the release of such psychic energies and to situations which they can more readily be built into mass movements or political parties. And I think to the extent that this argument holds water, the COVID-19 outbreak is such an occasion. Do you see any serious, organized political consequences out of this?
Well, thank you, Panos, and I can attest to the fact that you're one of the most educated journalists I know. But having said that,
you don't know that.
I think that if you put together, an economic crisis, a pandemic, and populism, you certainly have an explosive mix of things that are fully conducive to some sort of, I don't know if it's political paranoia, but certainly it's questioning. I can say that, throughout the past few months and from the onset of the pandemic, I mean, we've been absolutely bombarded by fake news stories and disinformation that have to do with this crisis. That's why we are now talking about the pandemic and the infodemic that's accompanying it. My staff here in preparation of our discussion was telling me that the commission has identified 2,700 sources of potential disinformation related to COVID-19 on a daily basis. And the European External Action Services Stratcom has collected more than 550 disinformation narratives. So you understand that, there's just such a wealth of this stuff out there from just about any kind of source you can imagine. And the result of this is that more and more measured trust is being eroded. I mean, there already wasn't a lot of trust in the political system, let's put it that way. But I mean, younger people did trust social media to get their information. Now, I was reading a study just the other day that says that trust in the media is declining amongst young people as fear for the coronavirus spreads. For example, in the UK, almost a quarter of youngsters from 18 to 24 age group say that now trust on social media is much less. And almost 60% of them think that the government should do something to give them correct information. So we have a sort of a trend reversal. I can tell you empirically and from what I've been watching that I think that for the virus, the most reliable source of information for people tends to be experts and less, conspiracy theory type stuff, and certainly less politicians who nobody, really trusts. At least in my country, one out of two Greek citizens think that, they shouldn't trust the information that's given to them by politicians. And in Europe, I think this phenomenon is widespread. So what's the political ramifications of all this? Panos Polyzoidis, I mean, the political ramification is that we need to tackle this. I mean, we need to invest in tackling this. I know it's tiring. I know it's difficult. I know it's overwhelming sometimes, but we just have to do it. I mean, we have to invest the resources in doing it. And this has to be a joint effort. It can't just be the state or the European Union. It has to also be like the platforms, which I'm not saying they don't do anything, Marisa. We've discussed this many times, but everybody has to become more active in tackling this phenomenon in a way that produces results.
Okay, and before we begin tackling it, I suppose we have to fully understand it. Well, to the extent that this is possible. There is a lot of talk about the four corners of deceit: the media, science, academia, and the government. And you, Anna, just mentioned that the government should take the lead in tackling this situation, which raises a lot of questions because, some people in the political spectrum, including many in your side of the political spectrum, would mistrust the government because the government is not a guardian of a society as a whole, certainly not a guardian of or a controller of beliefs. But is it the disaffected people, the dislocated people of the recent decades of a globalized economy that are more likely to fall prey to misinformation, disinformation, fake news, all sorts of nonsense? Are these the people who lost out in this restructuring of the global economy that has taken place over the last couple of decades at least, that are the clients of disinformation, you think, Anna?
Well, I think if you're a populist and you want to target somebody in that category, disinformation is a useful tool. But I'm not sure that, I'm sure that somebody empirically can maybe has some data on, who's an easier target and who isn't. Clearly, let's say education is going to play a role in whether you're targeted for disinformation, for example, your educational level or where you are, yes, what you've been through. But ultimately, the truth is the truth. So ultimately, what we need to do to deal with this is to remain committed to the truth and to find convincing media and ways to get the truth out there, quantitatively and qualitatively, and with enough spread so that people have access to it. That's the right side of the argument, the right side of history, the right side of tackling this information in my book, no matter who disinformation is targeting. And social media has the disadvantage that you can spread lies really easily, but it also has the advantage that you can reach the same people in the same amount of time. So
yeah, so it's a matter of cost effectiveness of
sure.
tackling disinformation.
For me, Panos, to close my intervention on this, it's a worthwhile investment, and it's not just an investment in it's an investment in democracy ultimately, because that's what becomes eroded at the end of the day through lies and misinformation. That's a huge danger. So an investment in democracy is always, for me, a value for money proposition.
But tackling the problem may have some dangers for democracy as well. And I would like to ask Bart, after reading to him just a sentence that will sound very familiar to him. In intensifying its fight against state-sponsored disinformation and foreign interference, the European Union should continue to clearly separate legitimate influence, which countries can and may exert, from malevolent interference, which should be met with consequences. Now, in trying to tackle terrorism, some people believe we have proceeded to limiting some of our civic liberties. Irrespectively of whether you agree on that or not, is there a danger of doing something similar in trying to tackle disinformation? There is certainly, one of the principal values upon which the European political system and European civilization is grounded on, is the freedom of exchange of beliefs and views. So where is the line that one shouldn't cross?
Well, that's an excellent question. So first of all, what is illegal offline is illegal online. That's a statement we can always make. So whenever we talk about counterterrorism and spreading of hate, that's illegal online as well as offline. So that's not a problem. What I'd like to focus on is behavior, to see like misinformation and harmful content. I think in a way we have to accept some of that. That's just the way of 21st century living in Western Europe. But disinformation and foreign interference, that is where it goes wrong. So I think every country has a right to open an embassy somewhere in Brussels or in Athens or in The Hague. And you can actually do influence operations there, which is perfectly fine. But interference is a meaning from international law. It's a non-intervention purpose. You can't
Okay, you have to
interfere.
give us a few examples of interference, historical, real examples.
Well, just recently, the Chinese have adopted the Russian modus operandi, and they actually targeted senior, high-level French civil servants to target them to differ their opinions on China. In Germany, Die Welt, a great newspaper, published the same. So there's narratives, the battle of narratives, as Josep Borrell, the foreign affairs chief from the European Union calls it, who was responsible for COVID-19, for example. But also in Serbia, the Chinese are actually making people in Serbia believe that the Chinese are actually the beneficiaries of the Serbian people and not the European Union, while it's exactly the other way around. So it's harming our investments. In Syria, there's a huge disinformation campaign going on at this moment. Even this morning, I saw some. We have a 20 billion euro investment in Syria, Panos, and that is not benefiting us if people start thinking that we are not helping them, but the Russians are. Just one remark, if I may, on what has previously been said. The main underlying problem of it all is, of course, micro-targeting, like Anne-Michel said, right? You can sell, I'm a Dutchman, so you can sell bicycles online, but you can also sell olives, but you can also sell TV screens online, just as easy as you can sell ideas, fake ideas, and anything that would benefit politicians to gain more power, politicians might use. So you have to regulate that. And exactly, during an election, if you're in your own bubble, and you just hear about one candidate or one party and no one else, the pluriformity of an election is gone. So that is something we have to think about as well. How do we consume the news during elections? And that's something that member states need to work on in legislation.
Well, there is a view to the effect that disinformation, the spread of social media, the rapid growth, the rapid spread of information that is possible right now has been leading to a political polarization. I would like to put to Marisa the idea that some social networks, and their algorithms, have been steering people towards polarizing content because it's more likely to bring engagement. And engagement brings more advertising and higher incomes for the operator. More ad impressions, yes. And I know, I read in The Economist again that in 2018, an internal report at your company warned that, at Facebook, warned that users were being pointed to divisive materials. And according to the Wall Street Journal, there was an initiative, there were plans to highlight less controversial posts, but these were sidelined partly because of the concern that these changes would affect conservative users more than others and would lose them to Facebook. Now, well, first of all, can you confirm all that? And secondly, is it true? I mean, have you established that the more polarized the content is, the better for the medium?
Thank you. So what I can say on this is that I can't deny issues or let's say challenges with bias or polarization that simply reflect the fact that we believe in a society that is polarized. But I am not going to deny whether there is a risk of polarization, because obviously we need to study all angles of the issues and what's happening on our platform. When it comes to engagement, I would like to refer to the fact what engagement means. What we mean and what then our algorithms do is to try to put content in front of our users that they like, that they're going to engage in a meaningful way. There has been many changes to the algorithm along all these years on how that works, and the signals have changed as well, so that so that we actually promote active engagement, the sharing of information, the conversations, as opposed to passive reception of information. For example, we promote the friends and family content over other that is less close to the user. All of that, so that actually it's something that the users like and engage with.
Active engagement, sharing and resharing and all that can be conducive to spreading misinformation.
Exactly. But that's why when we look at misinformation, what we'll try to do and what we'll put our resources on is to limit the spread of misinformation. One of the things that you said before is like, addressing misinformation could have some issues for democracy, could have some issues for diversity of voices on a platform. And it is true. It's very difficult because in many instances, misinformation is not illegal content. So although people don't want to see misinformation on the platform, it wouldn't be fair for us to remove that information unless there's an immediate physical risk of physical harm. So there's some conspiracies that simply might be wrong, might be inaccurate. It's not for us to decide, but that people want to talk about them. What we will do is that exactly what you said, we will restrict spread of misinformation, and we will inform people about the fact that has been labeled as misinformation through the work of our third parties, which are the fact checkers. So I do agree with you on the spread and the challenge of spread, and that's where we focus most.
May I ask a question, Panos?
Yes.
May I ask a question for Marisa? Are you also informing other platforms like Twitter or TikTok that this is going on, and do you also give technical selectors to them?
So what we do is that we collaborate, right? The platforms collaborate a lot in many instances, and I think that you know about it a lot, whether it's terrorism, whether it's child exploitation, and also misinformation. In fact, the Code of Practice on Misinformation in the EU was created as part of a collaboration between platforms and the European Commission. So out of these things also are positive things in that it's convenient, and we talk more to the Parliament, we talk more to the Commission, and we definitely talk to each other a lot, both on the technical levels, and we inform each other, and also at the issue level. In fact, when there's some coordinated on authentic behavior, we do a monthly report of it that is available, and we give the information that we can so that we all learn from each other. So to your answer, yes, as much as we can, of course, we collaborate. It's important.
But Marisa, is it not true that legally you, the networks, are cleared of any responsibility according to American law? So basically, if I go on Facebook and spread all sorts of potentially dangerous information with serious consequences, you as a network are cleared of any responsibility. You're just a network.
Well, I wouldn't put it in that way. And actually, there are laws that do apply to us as well. And the question is whether the liability lies. But certainly, we are in many instances liable as well. When it comes to very serious misinformation, as you're putting it, as you're explaining it, actually, we are the first ones to take action on that, irrespective of what the law would say, because we don't want that type of misinformation on the platform. Let's put some examples on, for instance, misinformation such as if you drink bleach, you'll get cured of a coronavirus. We immediately, when we saw this happening on the platform, started to take it down. So we actually removed that, although it's not illegal to say that, but because it creates such a danger for people. Now, how do we determine what's very dangerous and what's not? To what MEP Asimakopoulou said before, we look at experts, right? So we with the WHO, with other experts, to determine the severity of certain claims, especially when it comes to healthy misinformation.
Yeah, I suppose that latest incident you referred to about drinking bleach didn't make you particularly popular with some circles in Washington, D.C. But let me address Anna Michelle again, and I would like to put to you the idea that fact-checking and dealing with misinformation, disinformation, fake news looks a little bit like anti-doping control in sports. It's bound always to lag behind. It's bound to be very expensive. And hence, whether it's cost effective or not, that remains to be seen.
So what? We shouldn't do it?
So I'm asking, do we have enough money? I mean, for instance, look, during the outbreak, we realized that we would need, in some countries, we would need more health infrastructure. But then again, we cannot plan our whole health system on the basis of dealing with a huge outbreak like that. It
Sure.
has to be, economically viable.
Sure.
Is tackling disinformation economically viable?
Well, it depends. I mean, it's a money war too. I mean, people who are putting out the disinformation are investing funds and resources to do that, and then you have to have a proportionate response. But Europe's response to this is structured around basically three, let's say, principles. Marisa sort of mentioned that. One is, first of all, you have to decide what content you're looking for. So, what's disinformation? You have illegal content, you have harmful content, and you have to really define what you're targeting. Because if you give a very broad definition, then, like you say, Panos, then it becomes completely untenable to even deal with it. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, you have to invest in fact checkers. I mean, that's why we have this digital media observatory. That's what it does. I mean, and national governments have to do that too, and maybe the press has to do that too, and platforms now have to report almost, what is it, Marisa, monthly on what they're doing to counter COVID-19 disinformation. And believe me, because you mentioned liability, believe me, I can tell you something that my colleague here can attest to, who's very involved in this. When we're discussing in the Parliament the Digital Services Act, which is expected to happen, this is one of the central issues. Where do you draw the line, and who funds this thing? Because that's ultimately what happens. I mean, liability is a deterrent, but it's also an incentive to invest ex ante, so you don't have liability, and therefore some of this cost is transferred to media outlets or platforms or someone else in order for them to clear the content, in order for governments not to have to make as big an investment. So this becomes a more economically viable and tenable proposition in the terms with which you analyze them. So from the political perspective, from my side, the most important thing, when I talk to platforms about this is not a tug of war between politicians and platforms on who's going to pay for this. It's not only a tug of war on that. It's mostly about having a shared and common understanding and providing clarity and rules that are enforceable, clear and enforceable. So everybody knows what the rules are and everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, and that way you get results. And the second portion of this, and I know that Bart and I have discussed this, is political courage and will to actually speak out when you see disinformation from sources, especially when they're your allies or strategic rivals and partners or whatever it is, to actually say, to call out these efforts that are being done on a larger scale, like what Bart did with the Chinese, when the commission didn't do what it was supposed to. And finally, now it has, we have to say that at least, finally now they've named and shamed, but that took a lot of pressure And a lot of that pressure was from MEPs, and a lot of that pressure came from initiatives like Bart's letter about what was happening in the commission, and other MEPs who wanted to know, what's going on.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, Bart is an expert in defense. I mean, he has spent a lot of his career dealing with defense matters, and he's also advocating, I understand, that this digital threat of disinformation should be dealt with officially and systematically by the common defense and security policy of the European Union. But I would like to argue that this is an asymmetrical threat. I can organize a team of a very cheap, low-cost team of people who would spread misinformation, target whatever I decide to target, use all sorts of technologies and very cheap technologies, and thus create a threat that needs a lot of funds to be tackled on the other side, because you need fact checkers, you have high wages in the European Union, because you can't use the same technology to the same extent as the attacker can in order to defend yourself. So what's the solution for this in terms of a common defense and security policy of the European Union?
Well, first of all, I think the European Union should be proud of its EU versus Disinfo platform. So the European External Action Service is actually investigating disinformation campaigns, and is doing it with a dozen of people. So that's not too expensive, is it? And we're the only global power that has such a platform, and I'm proud of it, and I'd like to extend it and fund it more and give him a more robust mandate. We'll work on that. But first of all, let's acknowledge that. Then second, I think exposing them is also a way of, Bellingcat does it. I mean, that doesn't cost us anything, does it? There's journalists from the New York Times who do it. NGOs, EU Disinfo Lab, just meticulously disclosed a couple of weeks ago a Russian military intelligence operations in the EU. So that doesn't cost much. Looking at the source and talking about sanctions doesn't cost us a lot. I think that making sure that Sputnik and Russia Today are not really regarded as media outlets or press agencies, but as foreign agents of influence, marking them that way, doesn't cost us anything. I mean, restricting travel from people who actually conduct disinformation campaigns on behalf of Russia and China doesn't cost us anything. It's just a way of imposing costs on them. It's making rules, so making sure that they feel the cost and not we. Because you're absolutely right. It's low cost for them, it's low risk, and it's a high reward. And we should reverse all of those three things.
Okay, I'm here now. But Marisa, that would bring Facebook and other similar networks in direct conflict with some of the world's most important, strongest governments in some of your largest markets. How do you deal with that?
Nothing new about that, right?
No, nothing new about that. I wouldn't like to speculate on the cost that a ban in a huge country could have on your corporation.
True. I mean, what I can say on this is that the cost of running a network or running a service full of misinformation and foreign interference and misleading users is far greater than any other cost that would as the consequences of this. I do think, though, that, and I think maybe the word hasn't been mentioned yet, and I think it should. In a way, I think Bart has alluded to this. But the word of transparency, we have to be much more intentional on transparency to really spot, to do the things that Bart was saying we should all be doing more. So especially when it comes to elections, understanding where political ads come from, who's behind it, how much they're spending, who they're targeting, is fundamental. And I think that we had already in Europe a first test of how important and how effective transparency in the political scene can be, also linked to the challenges of misinformation. And I think that is something that the platforms, we do have a very big responsibility to do so. So that's where I would say it's not a cost, it's the cost associated to an opportunity. But also to see what other actors, who else apart from the government needs to be around the table when it comes to how do we engage politically on platforms? Where are the political parties, the advertisers, the rest of the ecosystem? And because these things have been looked in a very segmented fashion. And I hope that, for instance, the Democracy Action Plan, and that it's going to be debated in Europe in the next few months, gives us the opportunity to sit at the table and look at this as a multifaceted problem, and not only a problem of one or the other. In that sense, I think that we can be part of the solution and not the problem. And I think that is the attitude that the platforms, and certainly Facebook, wants to put on the table when it comes to these issues. But transparency is an important one. I want to really emphasize that.
Okay, now, as we are getting near to the end of this session, I would like to pit Anna Michelle against Bart, because you belong to two different political groups. And there is a general view around the world that conservatives are more likely to fall victims of misinformation, disinformation, fake news, what have you. And there is a lot of, there are several ideas and views as to why this is. In some countries, it's a political system that means that liberals are stronger in cities and conservatives in the rest of the country. And due to the political system, the first past the post system, the conservative votes matter more. But I would like to ask you, first of all, do you agree that conservatives are, Anna, let's start with you. Do you agree that conservatives are more likely to buy into fake news and the rest of that stuff? And does that mean that conservatism has been changing drastically from what we've known in the last decades, to 20 years ago?
Panos, I generally believe less and less in these, labels, conservative, liberal. I mean, I think that you can have different views on different issues, and I think when it comes to disinformation, I mean, you're either a straight shooter and you believe in the truth and you want the truth, or you're not, and you're willing to use other type of tools, including disinformation or propaganda or whatever it is. If anything, I think that propaganda and disinformation and this kind of stuff is probably, if you look at it historically, is probably more of a tool used for leftist oppression and direction in political life than something that comes from the conservative camp.
Well, precisely. I'm arguing that this has been changing in the last few years, that it is the Brexiteers that capitalized on disinformation. We all remember the huge buses reading £350 million into the NHS. And that was a joke, clearly. That was a piece of disinformation. And also, it has been argued that President Trump has been gaining from this kind of procedures, at least in the 2016 election. So, hasn't it all changed the nature of conservatism a tiny bit?
In my book, that's populism. I mean, a government like the government of Tsipras, used these kind of tools very effectively. during the years of the economic crisis in Greece. So for me, what you're describing is populism. It doesn't have to do with whether the government is conservative or not conservative. It has to do with methods. And I think if anything marks a change, it's the tools. I mean, it's the fact that now with this online, in this digital world, everything is just so much easier and so much cheaper and so much more accessible to such a wide. I mean, to do a disinformation campaign, you had to either be the government or you had to own a newspaper or television channel. Now you don't. Now you just have to, have bots, or you have to have a network. Or yes, I know you describe it as something very expensive, and obviously, when China does it, or when Russia does it, or the Kremlin does it, it's an expensive, huge proposition. But, teeny things can grow into big things on the internet. We've seen that through social media platforms. And that's, in my mind, that's the difference. It doesn't have to do with whether you're conservative, liberal. It has to do with populism, and it has to do with the media channels that are now so widely available to such a wider range of actors. At least that's my view of it.
So, Panos, my 5 cents on this, right? Because I'm in a liberal fraction in the European Parliament, but I'm a moderate conservative myself, so I'm a bit weird there. But
yeah, well, there's always a problem with the use of the term liberal in the States and in Europe.
Exactly.
We've been using it in the American sense in recent.
I know. So the main problem is here in the American sense, it's with an illiberal order. And it's not about conservatism. It could be like it could be a leftish, rightish, doesn't matter. But it's an illiberal order that is being strengthened by creating discord, deceiving, not being sure who to trust, and then going for the strong man who rises from this ashes. And that is exactly what Michel has said. It's in Russia. It's China. It's the strong man who erupts from a chaotic information environment, and that is the way that I look at it. And it's an illiberal tool. And there's one thing I'd like to add on that. I think that democracies are not able to spread disinformation because they will go down themselves. Democracies have to value truth. And democracies will always do so. I think Trump, like you said, he's in a very problematic position. One thing about him creating disinformation or not, Trump is not waging disinformation campaign against the European Union. We might think he does it on his Twitter account, but he does not have an administration that is targeting the European Union. So he's a geopolitical ally, a military ally, and we should distinct that from Russian and Chinese interference.
Well, he just has a less conformist way of airing his political views himself.
He's illiberal.
I say non-conformist. Yeah, okay. Now, I would like to ask each one of you for one final thought about the issues we've been discussing. The most poignant thought about it at this stage, post-COVID, and ahead of God knows what. Marisa.
Gosh, it's really difficult to say it all in one sentence. I would say that this is definitely a challenge, but that we need to take this as an opportunity as well. I think that the European Union has started to and has reinforced the work with the platforms when it comes to the fight on misinformation and disinformation. We hope that this also in the European Commission's side of things, which is what I've been working on in the past months. I have a lot of hope for this debate to continue in the same constructive way at the European Parliament, addressing all the different elements that we've come here. But when it comes to, we are in a difficult position because most of disinformation or misinformation is legal. We need to take into account the fundamental rights of people to share their opinions. But at the same time, we also need to be very clear that things are harmful and that harm others need to also be addressed and removed. So on the one hand side, give the opportunity to explain, to have conversations about what misinformation is on the platform, but also understand that digital skills and an investment in critical thinking for all our population is absolutely essential, and that not one size fits all, right? So to the beginning of the conversation, not all users online are the same, have the same skills, have the same interests, and we need to make sure that they get the skills that they need, and promote, against misinformation, promote good information, promote authentic sources of information, promote original reporting. So promote information, good information, demote misinformation, create a space of critical thinking.
Thank you, Marisa. And Bart, one final thought?
One final short thought. So, the European Union is very good at words, and Michelle and I know it. We produce a lot of text, but we don't actually do much in deeds. And what is actually necessary now that we expose actors, we do naming and shaming, but we also have tough stratcom against them. And then, if that won't help, we do diplomatic decharging. So we ask ambassadors to come to the EU. Then fourth, if that doesn't help, we take out visa. Then we hit art expositions abroad. We could have, but we also should protect people who would expose disinformation operations, academia, journalists, etc. And then when nothing helps, we should do sanctions, freeze assets of the people behind it, restrict travel, make sure that people who are actually, like Russian GRU, that they can't rent any service at our hosting providers anymore, right? Why should we do them a favor in hosting their websites in our data centers? So quit with it. Actions, deeds. Thank you.
And thank you, Bart. Anna, Michelle?
We need a strong public-private partnership to tackle disinformation. This is critical to our health, it's critical to our welfare, and ultimately it's critical to maintaining democracy.
Right. Thank you very much. I think that should bring us to the end. It's almost 1 hour. I think it was a fruitful discussion, and I hope those watching it thought the same as well. I must thank Marisa Jimenez Martin from Facebook in Brussels, and Anna Michelle Asimakopoulou, a member of European Parliament of the, as you can clearly see, of the European People's Party group. Yes, right behind you. And Bart Groothuis of the Dutch MEP belonging to the Renew group. And thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for taking the time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.